Welcome back, everybody. My name is Shorupan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Invest, and this is the second video in a 4-part video series explaining what is Bitcoin. If you haven't watched the previous video, which explains the context and the reasoning behind why we needed a Bitcoin, please go and do so. I'm sure it's available on whatever platform you're watching. In this video, we're going to tackle some of the computer science concepts that govern Bitcoin as a network protocol. So that is exactly what Bitcoin is, and this is really where we're going to dive deep into how Bitcoin functions. And so Bitcoin is a combination of 3 things: a network protocol, some complex cryptographic functions, and a set of game theoretical equilibrium systems that dynamically adjust to ensure the incentive structure of every network participant. So when you start to talk about the technicalities of Bitcoin or the technology underpinnings of it, many people talk about it as a new invention that just came out in 2008. That is far from the truth. It is clear now, and was clear to computer scientists, that Satoshi Nakamoto took various subsects of computer science, which were deeply investigated by brilliant computer scientists over the last several decades, and put them together in a way that architected Bitcoin system. What I mean by that is, let's say all of the ingredients from a technology perspective were already existing before Bitcoin. All of the ingredients that would make the recipe were there, but Satoshi Nakamoto architected the recipe in a way that had not been done before. And really what Bitcoin is it's a test in mass collaboration. In other words, using a distributed system, which again, is not a new concept. Distributed computing is definitely not a new concept. Satoshi Nakamoto overlaid that with a set of game theoretical functions that was secured by cryptography. So let me try to break this down in the simplest way possible that still the average person who doesn't have a degree in computer science can digest. When the internet came about, data was already abundant in the digital world, and the internet made data transferable virtually to an unlimited degree. And so let's examine back before Bitcoin and before the internet, what there was in terms of transactional databases. There were ledgers, and ledgers were accounting tools that kept a record of physical cash or physical commodities. And so really what Bitcoin is a way of duplicating a distributed ledger that keeps track of how much money everybody has. Now, the reason that seems like a bizarre concept is because since the formation of the internet, you never needed to do that because large central institutions did that for you. So let me explain. If I have a piece of physical matter, this cup, this laptop, this is governed by a rule of scarcity. I can't just duplicate this laptop out of thin air until, of course, now the invention of 3D printing, maybe that will change. But up until now, this had material, tangible infrastructure that would not allow it to be abundant. What the internet does is, what digital platforms do is it makes things abundant. So if you have a digital asset, let's say a picture on your computer, you can actually duplicate that infinite amount of times with very little complexity. You just right click, copy and paste, and there you go, you've made a duplicate. And you could continue to make a duplicate millions of times on your computer. Even on a very remedial computer, you can do that. So when we had cash had a physical, tangible quality to it that it just couldn't be duplicated. And if you did, that would be what was forged, and you created physical, like cryptography, signatures and things of that nature to ensure that that wouldn't happen. But when we moved to digital the digital world, you couldn't just move, oh, here's digital cash and it's just another digital product, because you would come in contact with what computer scientists call the double spend problem. And really, Bitcoin is a solution to the double spend problem. How can you have digital money without ensuring that there isn't two of every digital dollar or every digital rupee? How can I have a digital dollar on my computer without me just duplicating that a million times, which is what you can do with any digital product, albeit a picture, an email, whatever. So when we first came in contact with this problem, well before Bitcoin, what we did is central intermediaries started to pop up. Visa, PayPal, Facebook, Apple, and they said, you know what? We are going to keep account of everybody's ledger. We are going to make sure that Shorupan doesn't send the same dollar to two people. And so they centralized the ledger in their database. And that worked incredibly. That worked so efficiently that the digital economy boomed, that everything became a digital asset and everything became held in the silos of these centralized institutions. Remember, before this digital world arose, you couldn't do that because everyone was using cash. And I'm even going before the advent of debit cards, where everyone just had cash and everyone kept track of their own ledger, and the emergence of a bank was just there to keep hold of your cash or your gold or whatever it was. But in the world of digital, this was not the case. And so what we went from was a decentralized world, and a digital world, we became a centralized world where the ledger was on one person's computer. And we never saw that as an issue until, of course, 2008, when we as a people lost faith in those same institutions. Now, it wasn't the first time that they gave us evidence to lose faith, but I guess it became the time that we took it seriously. And what Bitcoin addresses is there a way to take that ledger? Because it's obvious that all money needs to become digital, but is there a way to take that ledger that we've exported to Visa and Facebook and PayPal? And can we make it so that it's visible for everyone, and that the authorization of a transaction, it could be done by anybody? In other words, I don't need Visa to tell me that I sent money to my friend. I don't need a bank to tell me I sent money to my friend, because there is a third party or a distributed a way of me being able to do that, where everybody in the world, every node in the network can see that transaction, and then there's a third party distributed way of validating that. And that is where Bitcoin's consensus algorithm plays a pivotal role. What it says is, let's keep a copy of this ledger on every computer that wants to participate in the network. So if you want access to every transaction that's happened on the Bitcoin blockchain, let's just download the blockchain, just download that server, and you'll have access to it. So now you have an immutable record of every transaction that's ever occurred, which used to be a luxury only the centralized databases had the ability to do. So now this database exists on multiple computers, but that's really not the genius that ties this together. The genius that ties this together is, how is a new transaction, so it's great that we all have a history of the transaction, but how is a new transaction added and validated to this ledger? And this is where the consensus algorithm comes into place. How do we trust nobody is the question that Bitcoin answers. Because trusting in Visa is great until Visa does something wrong, until Visa gets hacked. So how can we trust nobody? And in order to trust nobody, you have to make a set of game theoretical implications that make it more profitable for everybody to play by the rules than for any one party to try to take down the system. So let me repeat that again. You needed a validation mechanism where anybody could validate the transaction, and everybody can prove that that was an accurate validation, so that when Shorupan sends money to his friend, every ledger in the network gets updated with the same transaction, and we know that the person or the entities that validated that specific transaction, could be any computer in the world, was acting in an accurate fashion. And so we call that Bitcoin's consensus algorithm. They use something called the proof of work method. And the proof of work method essentially allows any computer to be able to solve, so any computer can act as the validator. They can take Visa's role, they can take PayPal's role. They say, okay, you download the whole blockchain on your computer, and now you can act as a validator of the transaction. So some random computer that you've never met is now able to say that, yes, Shorupan actually had that money on his computer, and he sent it to his friend. That's not a duplicate. He didn't send it to anyone else. The money has been sent, and now let's stamp a copy of that to every ledger in this network. How does that happen? How do we reach mass consensus? That's why I started this by saying, really, Bitcoin, more than a computer science feat, is a feat in mass coordination. It's very simple. We have to make sure that the validator, and it could be anyone, and it is usually many, many different computers that fight over the ability to validate. And I'll explain why they fight, what's the incentive behind it. We have to make sure that the computer that validated this transaction is validating it accurately. And how we do that is by making them solve complex problems, solve complex computing problems to ensure that they executed a certain amount of tasks. So you make them solve a mathematical equation. It's called SHA-256. And that equation requires you to run advanced computational functions for a period of time, so your computer is running. In order for your computer to keep running, you have to expand electricity. Kinetic energy has to be flipped to be able to do that, and electricity is not free. Let me explain that again. In order to validate a transaction, in order to be the validator that used to be Visa, I have to solve a very complicated equation. This equation can be solved by my computer, no problem, but my computer has to run that equation for a certain period of time. If my computer is running that equation for a certain period of time, it's consuming electricity. In order for it to consume electricity, Shorupan, the owner of that computer, has to pay for that electricity. So if you tie it back, in order for Shorupan to act as a validator, he has to invest money. So why am I doing that? It's because for me accurately validating a transaction, I receive Bitcoin as my reward. In other words, the way that the currency that was created then that is being used in this transaction is distributed into the network is by the same people who are validating the transactions. So what Satoshi Nakamoto did by this very sophisticated systems architecture is he aligned every interest. So the incredible thing which Bitcoin accomplished is that it aligned all the incentives for all the people that are involved. All the network participants, for the first time in a digital monetary system, had the same incentive structure. Whereas the customer is looking to transfer Bitcoin, which they hope to be an accurate representation of a ledger from one party to another party. The network validator is looking to receive that same Bitcoin in terms of rewards. So he is going to act accurately to validate this transaction in an unbiased fashion. He is not going to tamper with the network, because if he tampers with the network, the consequence is he wasted all of that computing power and he's going to get no coins. Now, if you want to know how that arbitration mechanism works, well, that gets a little bit too complicated for this video. We want to just keep this trying to get the high level of how this works. So when I talk about this validator, this is what the validation process of spending electricity in order to run advanced computing functions to solve that cryptographic hash function, which allows you to validate a transaction. That process is called mining. Mining, you've probably heard about cryptocurrency mining, where you're essentially allowing large amounts of computers, very powerful computers, which are hyper specialized to solve these cryptographic hash functions, to just keep running in order for you to compete in a global computation race with many other miners who are looking to do the same thing to solve that problem, so then they can add the newest transaction between Bob and Sally to the ledger that goes on everybody's computer. And so now through this systems architecture, through something like a consensus algorithm of SHA-256, through the network validation which comes about because of the miners, validators, and then through the fact that a copy of this ledger lives on everybody's device, you have created a peer-to-peer system of money using computation processes that had existed for decades. That is a high-level, undiluted version of how Bitcoin works from a technical perspective. Please watch the video a couple times, and if you want to learn more about the exact computer science behind the Bitcoin blockchain, and oh, by the way, let's address why it's called a blockchain. It's called a blockchain because every time a series of transactions are validated by the network, it is packaged together in the database in what appears to be blocks. So we simplified the name and called it a blockchain. It is a sequential database that is built off the information from the previous transaction. The hash and the nonce are pulled so that you have this sequential database. And the reason that's important is because that means it's immutable. If someone is trying to tamper with it, it is already locked in from transaction to transaction to transaction. So in order for you to reverse a transaction that happened yesterday, you would need to tear apart this blockchain. And for you to do that, you would have to be a validator that poses a threat to the network, which means you would have to beat out the hundreds of thousands of supercomputers which are now competing to be appropriate validators, thus making it uneconomical for you to try to do that. It is easier for you to just support the network. And if there's one thing that I want you guys to glean away from this explanation, it's this. In game theory, in mass coordination, what you want to do is make sure it's easier to support your network. It's more lucrative for you to support the Bitcoin network than to try to bring it down. That is not the case in centralized financial systems. It is more lucrative for me to hack Visa than for me to support Visa. It is more lucrative for me to try to hack and bring down Facebook or PayPal than it is for me to support them. This is the systems architecture of the future. It is an absolute marvel when you think about it from a game theoretical perspective. And that is, again, a high level of how the Bitcoin and the Bitcoin blockchain works.